Hey everyone, welcome back to Stadium Stats. Today we're going to be looking at Week 18 of the NFL schedule and going into my predictions, and then following that we will go into my power rankings. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first game we're going to look at is a game on Saturday afternoon between the Browns and Ravens, and yes, this is a divisional game, as every game is in Week 18. The Browns, they're coming off a loss with their starting quarterback being Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and he played pretty poorly in this game, as did the whole entire team, as they lost 3-20 against another backup quarterback in Tyler Huntley for the Dolphins. They did not play well. They have not been playing well all season. Their defense led up a decent amount of points to Tyler Huntley and the Dolphins, who did not have Tua or Jalen Waddle, and they were still able to perform relatively well on offense. So that defense of the Browns that has been relatively decent all year did not look that good, as the Dolphins have struggled most of the year without Tua, but they didn't struggle here. The Browns' offense only put up 3 points, and they were really abysmal and have not been good under Dorian Thompson-Robinson yet. The Ravens, on the other hand, they're coming off a win over the Texans on Christmas Day, 31-2, in a game where they just dominated the entire time. The only points they let up was the safety. They could not be stopped on offense, but their defense looked phenomenal against the Texans, who, yes, have been struggling, but are still a good team at the end of the day. The Ravens do tend to struggle a little bit against divisional opponents, but I do think this should be a relatively easy game. I'm going with the Ravens to win. Moving on, we've got another matchup in the AFC North between the Bengals and the Steelers. The Bengals, they're coming off a win over the Broncos on Saturday Afternoon Football, 24-30 in overtime. They played amazing on offense. Their defense did step up when needed, as they forced 2 3-and-outs in overtime. They should have won that game. Then they didn't run the clock out, and then they still ended up winning in overtime. Really impressive performance on offense. Joe Burrow continues to play at an MVP level, and if they had a better record, would be talked about more in the MVP conversation. And their defense looked a lot better. T. Higgins and Jamar Chase had great games. T. Higgins especially with 130 yards and 3 touchdowns. Just a fantastic performance by that Bengals offense. Unfortunately, Chase Brown did get a little banged up in that game and is questionable to play on Saturday with a high ankle sprain. The Steelers, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Chiefs on Christmas Day, 29-10, in a game where they did not look good. Russell Wilson didn't look good. Their offense really couldn't perform. They only put up 10 points. They let up 29 points to the Chiefs, which the Chiefs have still yet to score 30 points in a game this season. So it definitely wasn't the best performance by the Steelers' defense either. That being said, I do think this will be a relatively close game, as the Bengals and Steelers tend to play each other pretty close, but I'm going to go with the Bengals to win this and maybe even make the playoffs. Moving on to Sunday, we've got a matchup between the Panthers and the Falcons. The Panthers, they're coming off a terrible loss, 48-14 to the Buccaneers, in a game where the connection between Bryce Young and Adam Thielen looked fantastic, and other than that, they really couldn't do anything. They have Chuba Hubbard on IR, and we're missing him in that game, and they really did not have a run game without him, and their pass game really didn't involve anybody except for Adam Thielen, but Bryce Young did look pretty good in that game. Their defense, though, looked abysmal, as they let up 48 points to the Buccaneers, who, yes, are a really good offense, but it was just a disappointing turn of events for that Panthers defense, as they've struggled most of the season, but this was a game they especially struggled in. The Falcons, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss in overtime to the Commanders on Sunday Night Football, in a game where Michael Penix looked pretty good. Their offense was really firing. Their defense looked good most of the game until right at the end, when they let the Commanders come back and end up winning that game in overtime. The Falcons are a much better team than the Panthers, and I'm going to go with the Falcons to win this. However, I do think the Panthers will give the Falcons a little bit of trouble, as divisional matchups tend to be close, and the Panthers have been playing their divisional opponents close most of the season, again, disregarding last week's game against the Buccaneers, but I am still going to go with the Falcons to win. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Texans and the Titans. The Texans, they're coming off a terrible loss to the Ravens in a game where they could not do anything and only put up 2 points. Their offense did nothing the whole game. Nico Collins didn't even look good, and he's been that bright spot all season for them on offense. And Joe Mixon also did not look good, and he's also been a bright spot for them most of the season. They also looked bad on defense as they let up 31 points to the Ravens, although the Ravens' offense is a really good offense in the league. The Titans, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Jaguars, who were starting a backup quarterback. Both teams were starting backup quarterbacks, and both teams are pretty bad, but they lost 13-20. The Titans are not a good team, but they did play the Texans really close last time, and did end up taking them down. So I wouldn't be surprised if this was close, but I'm going to pick the Texans to win this game. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Giants and the Eagles. The Giants, they're coming off a crazy win over the Colts, 33-45, in their first win at home of the season. They've been really bad all season and were in contention for the number 1 pick, but ended up winning this game against the Colts, which also knocked the Colts out of the playoffs. Drew Lock played unbelievable. He had 5 total touchdowns, very few incompletions, over 300 passing yards, and while their defense did not play well as they let up 33 points and Jonathan Taylor ran all over them, they did still have 2 interceptions, which almost doubled their amount of interceptions on the season, as they only had 3 going into that game. The Eagles, on the other hand, they're coming off a win over the Cowboys 41-7 in a dominant performance. Their defense had a pick 6 right away, and they never looked back as their offense just continued to fire. Kenny Pickett looked pretty good and threw the ball really well to Devontae Smith, and Saquon Barkley ran all over them and passed the 2,000-yard mark for what is a very limited amount of players in NFL history that have rushed for 2,000 yards. The Eagles should win this game pretty easily, as the Giants are not a good team, and while they did perform well last week, that is a fluke most of the time, and I do not expect them to play that well in this game, so I'm going to go with the Eagles to win. Up next is a matchup between the Jaguars and the Colts. The Jaguars, they're coming off a win with their backup quarterback, Mac Jones, over the Titans, who are also a bad team, but the Jaguars, they are also a bad team, so it really didn't say that much, as both teams are pretty bad. The Colts, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Giants in a game which was very disappointing. They were fighting to keep their playoff hopes alive and ended up losing to the team that had the number 1 pick at the time, and let up 45 points to a team that has struggled on offense all season. The Colts' defense looked terrible. Their offense looked all right, but Joe Flacco really struggled with interceptions, and while Jonathan Taylor played amazing, nothing else on that team seemed to work. The Colts are still better than the Jaguars, but I really wouldn't be surprised if this is a really close game. In fact, I think this will be a really close game, as these teams tend to play each other pretty close, and the Jaguars actually won their matchup earlier in the season. That being said, the Colts tend to win. Both of these teams tend to win when they play at home, so I am going to go with the Colts since they are home, but I do think this will be a close matchup. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Commanders and the Cowboys. The Commanders, they're coming off a win on Sunday Night Football over the Falcons in overtime. Their offense looked pretty good despite Terry McLaurin being absolutely shut down. Jaden Daniels rushed for over 130 yards. He also passed really well and had a bunch of touchdowns and just played a really, really good game. That's multiple wins in a row for them, and they clinched a playoff spot. So really impressive performance by them. The Cowboys, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Eagles in a game where they got absolutely demolished. Cooper Rush did not look good. That offense couldn't do anything without CeeDee Lamb, and CeeDee Lamb is not going to play in this game either. So for that reason, I am going to go with the Commanders, especially because the Cowboys' defense played way worse last week than they had been playing in the few weeks prior. So I am going to go with the Commanders to win this game. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Bears and the Packers. The Bears, they're coming off a loss 3-6 on Thursday Night Football to the Seahawks in a game which their defense played really well, but their offense couldn't do anything. They did have a touchdown called back, and both on offense and on defense, and that could have changed the entirety of the game, but the Bears are not a good team. The Packers, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Vikings 25-27 in a game where through 3 quarters they looked terrible on offense, terrible on defense. They couldn't stop anything besides in the passing game. And although their run defense did look pretty decent, and they couldn't get anything going on offense, as Jordan Love was held under 100 yards through 3 quarters. That being said, they really rallied and came back into the game towards the end against a good Vikings team, but they did still end up losing. The Packers are a much better team than the Bears. Last time they played, it was a really close game, and they won on a blocked field goal. But this game is being played in Lambeau Field, and that really doesn't give the Bears much of a shot. So I am going to choose the Packers to win in a game that typically goes the Packers' way anyways in that divisional rivalry. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Saints and the Buccaneers. The Saints, they're coming off a loss to the Raiders in a game where they lost 25-10 against a really bad Raiders team. Their defense didn't look good as the Raiders have struggled on offense all season and were able to put up 25 points in this game. That being said, both teams are pretty bad, so this was a really disappointing performance by the Saints as the Raiders are not a good team and they lost pretty badly to them. The Buccaneers, on the other hand, they won 48-14 against the Panthers in a game where the only thing their defense couldn't stop was Adam Thielen to Bryce Young's connection, or rather Bryce Young to Adam Thielen's connection. And other than that, they played unbelievable football. Their defense was stopping everything. Their offense could not be stopped, and they put up 48 points. I do think the Buccaneers should win this game pretty easily as they are a better team than the Saints, and so I'm going to go with the Buccaneers to win. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Bills and the Patriots. The Bills, they're coming off a win over the Jets in a game where they absolutely demolished 40-14, but all 14 of those points came in garbage time after the Bills were already up by 40 and had put in backups. They looked amazing on offense. They looked amazing on defense. Really, not enough can be said about this Bills team, but they did struggle the last time they played the Patriots. The Patriots, they're coming off a loss to the Chargers 40-7 in a game where they looked terrible on defense. Their offense really couldn't get much going. So pretty poor performance by them and an amazing performance by the Chargers, which does say a lot considering the Chargers had not put up that many points all season. But the Patriots are a struggling team. They do play their divisional opponents somewhat close as we've seen against the Bills 2 weeks ago. But I am still going to go with the Bills to win this game. I think it should be a relatively easy matchup for them too. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Chargers and the Raiders. The Chargers, they're coming off a major win over the Patriots in a game that clinched them a playoff spot, and they put up 40 points. Just looked amazing on offense. It looked great on defense as they only let up 7 and forced a lot of sacks and some turnovers. On the other hand, we've got the Raiders, who are coming off a win, which really did hurt their seeding in the draft as they won 25-10 against a bad Saints team. But their offense looked pretty good. Brock Bowers played really well, as he has all season, and he set the single-season receptions record for a rookie, the single-season receiving yards record for a tight end as a rookie, and has played unbelievable this season, just having a historic season. That being said, the Chargers are a much better team than the Raiders, so I'm going to go with the Chargers to win. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Chiefs and the Broncos. The Chiefs, they're coming off a win over the Steelers 29-10 on Christmas. They're now going to be starting their backups as they've clinched the number 1 seed, and so they're really not playing for anything anymore. The Broncos, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Bengals in a game where they brought it to overtime. Bo Nix played really well, had a few great passes to Marvin Mims, who also played incredible in that game, but their defense really struggled against a Bengals team that has played amazing on offense all season. The Broncos have another win in their scenario for the playoffs and are playing for a lot because if they lose and either the Dolphins or Bengals win, then the Broncos do not make the playoffs. So the Broncos are playing for a lot. The Chiefs are playing for nothing. So I'm going to go with the Broncos to win. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Seahawks and the Rams. The Seahawks, they're coming off a win 6-3 over the Bears in a game where their defense played really well against a Bears offense that has been on and off struggling all season, but their offense could not get anything going. They did not have a run game after the first drive. They did not have a pass game at all and just had a ton of punts. That game had more punts than it had points, and just really poor game all around. The Rams, on the other hand, they're coming off a win over the Cardinals in a game where they played pretty well. They they won on Saturday Night Football, 13-9. Their defense is what really shined, as they only let up one touchdown and one field goal. But their offense really couldn't get a whole lot going besides Puka Nacua and Kyren Williams playing pretty well yardage-wise. They just couldn't score a lot of points. The Rams are a better team than the Seahawks, but I think this will be a really close game, and it could end up being for the division, depending on how a few other games play out with strength of schedule. But I am going to go with the Rams to win in what I think will be a very tight matchup. Last time they played, it went to overtime, and the Rams ended up winning. And I do think the Rams will sweep this series, as they're playing at home in this matchup. But I'm going to go with the Rams to win in what I think will be a very close matchup for the division. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Dolphins and the Jets. The Dolphins, they're coming off a win 20-3 over the Browns in a game where the Browns were not able to do anything on offense, and that part of that is due to who their quarterback was, but part of that is also due to the Dolphins' defense. The Dolphins also played pretty well on offense, considering they didn't have their starting quarterback in Tua, and Tyler Huntley played pretty well in his absence. But Tyreek Hill had a really good game, and considering they were missing Jalen Waddle, he really needed to step up, and he did perform pretty well. The Jets, on the other hand, they played an abysmal game against the Bills in a game where they didn't score until garbage time. They let up 40 unanswered points. They ended up only scoring against the Bills' backups and just played all around terrible. I do think the Dolphins are going to win this game, especially considering if the Broncos lose, which that game is going on at the same time, and the Dolphins win, then the Dolphins make the playoffs over the Broncos. So they're playing for a lot. If the Dolphins lose, they're out of the playoffs. So they're playing for a lot, and I think they'll win pretty easily against a bad Jets team. Up next, we've got a matchup between the San Francisco 49ers and the Arizona Cardinals. The 49ers, they're coming off a really good game that they ended up losing 34-40 on Monday Night Football against the Lions, but it was a really good offensive performance by them. Their defense, however, couldn't do anything. Neither defense in that game could really stop anything, and they ended up losing after being up at halftime and being up most of that game. But their special teams did not play very well, as their kicker missed 2 or 3 field goals and an extra point. The Cardinals, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Rams 13-9 on Saturday Night Football in a game where they scored a touchdown. Trey McBride finally got his first touchdown of the season after setting the record for most catches in a season without a touchdown. But other than that, they really didn't have many bright spots besides Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride. Their defense also did play relatively well, as they held the Rams to 13 points. But all in all, they really did not perform that well on offense, besides the trio of Marvin Harrison Jr., Trey McBride, and Kyler Murray. That all being said, I think this will be a close game. These two teams have played each other close. They played each other really close earlier in the season, and I'm going to pick the 49ers to win this one, but I don't think it'll be a blowout by any means. I think it'll be a close matchup. Finally, we've got a matchup on Sunday Night Football between the Vikings and the Lions. The Vikings, they're coming off a win over the Packers 27-25 in a game where they were dominating through 3 quarters and then let the Packers come back into that game after Sam Darnold threw an interception. But other than that interception, Sam Darnold had an amazing game. Justin Jefferson, Jalen Naylor, and Jordan Addison were an amazing wide receiver trio, and they just had an amazing passing offense there. And their defense played really well through 3 quarters and then let up 2 touchdowns in the last quarter. The Lions, on the other hand, they're coming off a win 40-34 over the San Francisco 49ers in a game where they were losing most of the game, and then in a shootout they were able to pick off Brock Purdy twice, which changed the course of the game, and they ended up winning that game. Kirby Joseph had both of those interceptions. He leads the league in interceptions at 9, and that defense really did not perform. The Niners had a really beat-up O-line, and the Lions did not take advantage of that at all. And besides the 2 interceptions, neither defense played very well in that game. That all being said, I actually think the Vikings are going to win this game in what I think will be a shootout, but the Vikings' defense is way better than the Lions' defense is at this point due to all the Lions' injuries. So I'm going to go with the Vikings to win in what I think will be the game of the week and a very close matchup. I'm not counting the Lions out by any means, but I am going to go with the Vikings to win, which also results in them winning the NFC North and the number 1 seed, because whoever wins this gets the number 1 seed and the NFC North. Moving on to my top 10 power rankings. Coming in at number 10 is the Cincinnati Bengals. They've been playing unbelievable on offense, if not the best on offense of any team this year. Joe Burrow's playing at an MVP level, but their defense has really let them down time and time again. But they did hold strong in overtime against the Broncos, keeping their playoff hopes alive. So for that reason, they're in at number 10. At 9, I've got the Buccaneers. They're blowing opponents out. Their offense is unbelievable. Their defense is playing okay at best, but it's inconsistent is the problem. But Baker Mayfield is also throwing some turnovers. However, despite all that, they're winning games, and they are playing unbelievable on offense despite Baker Mayfield's turnovers. So they're in at number 9. At 8, I've got the Rams. They've found ways to win both offensively and defensively. Their defensive line is playing really, really well. They keep getting a ton of sacks, and they are winning games. They won games a few weeks ago against the Bills in a shootout, and then the past 2 wins have been in really low-scoring games, so they can win in any fashion, and for that reason, they're in at number 8. At 7, I've got the Chargers. They just blew out the Patriots. They clinched a playoff spot. Jim Harbaugh is a great coach. Their run game is back now that they have J.K. Dobbins back, and their pass game with Ladd McConkey and Justin Herbert looks great. So for that reason, their defense is great. It's holding teams to it's really efficient defense. It's holding teams to minimal points. Their pass defense is unbelievable. So for that reason, they're in at 7. At 6, I've got the Ravens. Their defense has really improved throughout the season. Their coaching is great. Their offense is one of the best in the league. Derrick Henry's playing unbelievable. Lamar Jackson's playing in MVP level. And they're just unstoppable on offense. And their defense held the Texans to 2 points. So for that reason, they're in at number 6. At 5, I've got the Eagles. They're playing really well, both offensively and defensively. They held the Cowboys to 7 points and had a pick 6 and another interception. They're playing really well on offense as well. Saquon Barkley is the 9th running back ever to have 2,000 yards. And for that reason, and might even end up breaking the all-time single-season rushing record, and just looks unstoppable. They're winning games without Jalen Hurts, and when he gets back, that team will be even better. So for that reason, they're in at 5. At 4, I've got the Lions. They're beating teams really well on offense. The problem is their defense is really hurt, but they're still finding ways to win games. They're coached really well. They're converting 4th downs all of the time, and for that reason, they seem unstoppable. So if they can get a little healthier, which it seems like players are going to start to come back soon, then they should improve heavily on defense, and for that reason, they're in at 4. Number 3, I've got the Bills. They're playing unbelievable. They held the Jets to 0 points through 3 quarters of the game, and then put in all their backups, and then the Jets started scoring in garbage time, but they were up 33-0 with starters, and then put in Mitch Trubisky and still scored a 70-yard touchdown. So they're playing really well. They can't be stopped. They're beating their divisional opponents as they should be, and they end up they clinch the number 2 seed. So for that reason, they're in at 3. At 2, I've got the Chiefs. They're playing even better than they had been all season. They're almost undefeated. They only lost 1 game to the Bills. They clinched the number 1 seed. They're playing their backups this upcoming week, and then they have a bye. So they're going to be really well rested for the divisional round. They're playing even better than they had been because their offense is starting to perform. They finally scored almost 30 points. They still have yet to score 30 or more, but they scored 29 against the Steelers and held them to 10, which is really impressive performance by their defense and their offense. So for that reason, they're in at 2. And number 1 is the Vikings. They seem like they can't be stopped. Sam Darnold's playing unbelievable. Some consider him playing at an MVP level. I believe he should be in consideration for comeback player of the year. As he's improved more than any other player in the entire league. They also have a great wide receiver trio that seemed like it couldn't be stopped against the Packers. Their run game typically is pretty good behind Aaron Jones and Cam Akers. Their defense is arguably one of the best, if not the best in the league, and it's the best coaching defense in the league, as Brian Flores is the best defensive coordinator in the league. So for that reason, they're coming in at number 1. And not to mention, their head coach, Kevin O'Connell, is clearly an incredible offensive mind. So for that reason, they're coming in at number 1. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening this week. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and follow me on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And with that, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.